When she graduated first in her class at New York University Law School in 1945, firms turned her down, saying, "We already hired our woman," or "We have a Jew." She managed. Welcome to Women in Theater. I'm Linda Weiner, theater critic of Newsday, and our guest is Floria Lasky, the lifelong attorney for such legends as Jerome Robbins, Elia Kazan, and Carson's McCullers, and as one of the most powerful entertainment lawyers in the country, a legend all her own.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's not overpraise, you know, it's just reality.
That's kind of you. People often ask me, too, about how I got into the theater, but it was precisely because I couldn't get a job. And I stopped into a magazine where my brother had worked before his stint in World War II in the Army, just to be friendly, because I had been down near NYU to unsuccessfully ask for help getting a job. And
I mean, you were the editor of the Law Review there.
I was editor-in-chief of the Law Review, and so on. And so I was just saying hello, and somebody new there said, "Oh, I have a friend. He's a lawyer. Why don't you go to see him?" And his name was Bill Fitelson. He's in the theater. And I was happy to get a job. I had grown up in the Depression, and I wanted to be a trust buster. And that didn't work out because they also were full of employees down there in Washington. And so I went to see this man, and he hired me for $40 a week.
You thought you should get 70?
I thought it should have been 75.
75, all right.
But I was glad to get a job. I mean, it was quite clear. And my two daughters, who are lawyers as well, they believe everything I tell them, but it's hard for them to believe that in 1945, after World War II, that you could go to a large firm and they tell you they had a Jew in their staff, or that they had a woman.
Yeah, and these are lawyers, and it's not actionable, right?
No.
It wasn't.
Well, it might have been. Perhaps it might have been. But, well, it was no different than when I applied for a scholarship to Columbia Law School when I was graduated from Hunter College, which was my alma mater.
Phi Beta Kappa.
Well, and well, it's only significant because I had a good record.
Yeah.
And presumably was deserving of a scholarship from an academic point of view. Mm-hmm. And so I asked Columbia for a full scholarship. And they said they had no full scholarships for women. Now, I was very young at the time. I was about 18. And I often wonder what I would have done with that information much later. But at that time, I was quite naive, and we didn't talk about women's rights at that time and so forth.
Even though your mother was a feminist?
Well, my mother was a feminist in the sense that she believed that a woman should be independent. She had been an anarchist at 14, so... and so she believed that we could pick your career or whatever your way of life, but that you had to be independent. And that was most unusual for an immigrant to do.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't get the scholarship. I did get a full scholarship from NYU, which had a number of full scholarships for women.
Yeah.
And so I thought, quite well prepared and so on.
So was entertainment law the kind of field it is today?
Well, actually, the firm I joined, through the efforts of this man, where their activity was principally in the theater and motion picture. I don't think intellectual property had the same significance and importance as it does today, because it's a whole course of study. I mean, everybody goes to law school, has courses in intellectual property. I think we did have a course in copyright, I remember, by a very famous gentleman, nice gentleman named Derenberg, Professor Derenberg. He was quite famous at the time. And so when I joined this firm, It was fairly young and small, always stayed small, always specialized, and represented the Theater Guild. Now, I find, as with most things, people have short memories. The Theater Guild was the most outstanding producing company, perhaps in the world at the time. Yeah. I mean, it brought Shaw to this country and produced O'Neill. The first Porgy and Bess was done by them, and Oklahoma, and so on and so forth. And the people who ran it, unfortunately, died a long time ago, and some of its fame has been dissipated, but too bad.
But what a wonderful place for...
But it was a great place for me to start.
Yeah. And so how... you represented Kazan for 50 years.
Well, longer than 50 years, actually, because he was a client then, and happily we became involved, and I represented him and represented his work after he died a few years ago.
And Robbins?
Robbins, the same. It was early in his career, not at the beginning. And
do you remember when you first met him? What was the first job?
Well, I don't really remember. We represented on the town, but we did not. We represented Betty Comden and Adolph Green and so on, but we did not represent Jerry Robbins at the time. Represented the production as well.
Wow.
So now, they didn't have conflict of interest. People were not so. I mean, deals were more conventional, though we always hoped to make them attractive to the client. But today you couldn't do that.
How much difference is there between an agent and a lawyer? I hate to be too naive here, but I just wonder, do you need both?
An agent is really responsible for looking for employment for the client. If it's an actor, happens to be an actor, the client is an actor, or a writer, and so on. And the agent is supposed to, well, so is the lawyer, supposed to have his or her finger on the developments professionally and in the industry.
So you overlap anyway.
We do overlap. They usually work together. But Kazan had an agent for a much longer period than Robbins. Robbins did not have an agent for a very long time.
Now, Robbins, after Robbins died, you became the president.
Well, I was his executor and president of his foundation at the time. He had organized that foundation many, many years ago. And in fact, when he was quite poor, not rich as when he died, he gave part of his Fiddler royalty to that foundation. And in the memorial that was done in '98 when he died, Paul Leclerc, who was the president of the library, said that to whom Robbins had donated that royalty. He said that royalty had amounted to $2 million, which is fantastic.
Now, as the president of the Robbins Foundation, you approve of revivals, you license productions. How do you decide?
Well, it's a trust. He created a trust in which all of his rights repose. The ballets, which are presented the world over.
Yes, of course.
And his home here is the New York City Ballet, and still is. And the ballets are produced everywhere, but only by companies that are approved.
There's a committee for that.
By a committee of 6. I always wondered why Jerry Robbins had selected only 6, as though there could be a tie at some point.
You would have thought he would have figured that out.
Difficult. Yeah. And he was difficult because he was a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And he was a wonderfully generous person.
Was he hard on you?
Well...
He was hard on everyone, wasn't he?
I think he was hard on everyone. He was hard on everyone. But Peter Martins, who was head of the ballet, as I said to me that after all, I had represented him at that time for 40 or 50 years, so things must have been okay. And I said the same thing for him as well.
You represented Tennessee Williams for a brief time.
Yes,
not brief, 7 years doesn't seem like.
I had 7 years with Tennessee Williams.
Yes, and not your happiest time.
Well, with Tennessee, I represented Carson McCullers and still do. represented her all her working life, really, from time, well, actually from after Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And we were very, very close, family, and so on. She dedicated her books to, my girls were, they very close to her. And she was very close to Tennessee Williams. In fact, if I were to think of, when I think of Tennessee and whom he loved, because he didn't love many people, I think he loved Carson. He recognized her as a poet, and that was very important to him because he was a poet.
Yeah, okay, yes.
And
in those 7 years, was it a time of, I don't know which 7 years those were.
No,
was he
the
working?
latter 7 years.
So
I had to convince him once, and it made him laugh. He had a funny laugh. And he laughed at the strangest times sometimes, but it was good to hear. When he had another flop, I said, look, all of Shakespeare's plays are not Hamlet. And Ibsen, not all of Ibsen's plays were great. And it made him feel better, I think, because many of them were failures at the time.
Gypsy Rose Lee? Gypsy Rose Lee you represented?
Oh, yes.
Yes? In
Marvelous.
What way? What were you
Brilliant.
representing?
Well, she wrote a book. She wrote books.
Yeah, okay.
The G-String Murders was hers.
Yeah.
The autobiography, Gypsy, was hers. Although Arthur Lawrence, who adapted Gypsy into for the musical, did a brilliant job because it was a problem, because he decided to concentrate on the mother as opposed to Gypsy herself.
Yeah, Mama Rose.
And that was a brilliant notion and made for, I think, the greatest book in the theater, which is Gypsy. Perfect book.
Yes.
And she was a most extraordinary person. She was brilliant, stylish, talented, witty, and I remember her well. And it's a pleasure. She has a son who's a writer, whose name is Eric Preminger, and he lives in California, and he's a writer as well. And he wrote 2 very good books about the mother, his mother.
You his lawyer, too?
Yes.
Now, for example...
I knew him when he was 5.
When he was better be his lawyer.
Well,
right?
I'm going to be 84, so...
Love that.
That's a long time.
This is good. This is very good. When, for example, Fiddler on the Roof was revived in the David Loewe production, which was not the Jerome Robbins production.
Well, not strictly speaking.
Yeah.
It was mainly the Jerome Robbins production, because if you ask David Loewe, whom I like very much, he was most intelligent and honest. I don't think that all of his choices were better than Jerry Robbins, where he made some changes, the Exodus, and I did like the orchestra on the stage. That was quite attractive. Some people didn't. But I think Fiddler is a perfect work and didn't need any change.
Can you, as the arbiter, the representative and licensing these things, can you say, no, you have to follow his
designs? We have said that. In other words, David Loewe got permission from us, from the Trust, to do that.
Is there a West Side Story in our future?
Yes, it is.
Yeah?
Next year.
Really? Okay. We are taping this in February of 2007. And you think next year? Can you say who's going to direct it?
Well, I think Arthur Lawrence will be very much involved.
Okay. All right. He
knows it best. And Joey McNeely, who has done the companies that are traveling around the world and who worked as in the dance area with Jerry Robbins, will probably do the choreography.
So this would
reproduce the choreography.
Yeah, that's what, with Fiddler, the choreography was definitely reproduced, right, in the Fiddler. It was
and
the
in
rest
West
of
Side,
the and in West Side it must be also.
As a matter of fact, you know, they say that people argue about billing all the time and credit and what kind of credit. And I myself love words, and I objected when somebody said the Robbins choreography created by. I said, no, it wasn't created by. I said, Robbins choreography was reproduced by.
Yeah.
Because it was not an idle difference.
No.
Because that's what we want.
And this whole intellectual property rights thing must be getting so much more complicated now with the internet. How do you protect things?
Well, people always violate the law. everywhere.
Yeah.
But if you know it, and they're usually respectful, very often
You think
respectful.
so? You said once,
And,
yeah.
you know, when somebody creates a work of genius, it's always copied somewhere.
Yeah.
You see a lot of West Side finger snapping.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And things of that kind.
Absolutely. The dance at the gym is there. We keep seeing it in things.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
You said once that for example, a contract for Joshua Logan for South Pacific was 5 pages long, but that there's no director now that of any importance that wouldn't have like 17 pages in a contract.
That's correct.
What changed?
Well, a lot changed. Unfortunately, we learned a lot from Josh Logan, who got the Pulitzer Prize as the co-author with Oscar Hammerstein, but he never got royalties. Because before the contract was signed, he was the director, and to remain the director, the Rodgers and Hammerstein office, they've tried to make amends, and they have, because Ted Chapin is a wonderful theater person,
Yeah.
and he respects creativity, so he's made up for it. But there are so many permutations. I mean, at that time, you didn't worry about something being televised when it started.
Yeah.
I don't
and
think
then
we had television.
Taped off the TV. You really can't control it,
No,
can you?
those certain things you can't control.
Yeah.
I remember when, because motion pictures was another part of my practice, and we were very, very technical about the contract. We never wanted to say you could sell to the distributor, Warner Brothers or another company, that they could sell the picture. They could. We said they could license the picture. It's true that in many and therefore, you found at the time that when they made contracts with exhibitors and theaters, they would say we license the picture, because when you sell something to somebody, as when you sell a record, query, or you're selling them everything that's in it and on it, and is the selling of it like buying a collar or a suit?
You must love this.
I do. I've been doing it for over 61 years.
Such good stuff. Kazan, people don't do Kazan productions anymore. No, do they, when you do a Death of a Salesman?
Well, I was at a dinner one night. It was very glamorous, which is one of the aspects of the theater that we like.
Yeah.
And there's hard work, too, but there's glamour. And we were talking, and Mike Nichols was there, whom I don't happen to know very well. And there were a number of revivals. I think Streetcar was being revived and so forth. And it was interesting. He was asked whether he had liked the revival. He said, I don't go to see them. I don't know whether that was true of all. He said, but he would never go to see a revival of Kazan's Streetcar or Death of a Salesman, because he never wants to forget the Kazan production, of both, which was still in his head. Wow. Naturally, I admired him before, but I admired him a lot more after that.
Yeah.
Because Kazan was a genius, no question.
Your husband, who died in 2000.
Yes, yes.
David Altman.
David Altman, yes.
Once in 1978, he was advertising.
He was in the advertising business. We met.
Mostly fashion.
He was in the Army, went to law school at night, which is where we met.
Yeah.
But he didn't practice law. He stayed in the advertising business.
When I read that in 1978, he did an op-ed piece for the New York Times complaining about the selling of political candidates on television.
Right.
And he said then that a candidate is not a can of soup.
Right.
What would he say today? Well,
he talks to me a lot.
Oh, okay, yes, yes.
We were married 54 years, so that's a lot of talking for both of us. Yeah. We both talked a lot. Well, I think he would say the same thing. I was thinking of, incidentally, I was thinking of, what's his name, the vice president? Cheney? No, not the current vice president. The one who was on the Oscars the other night.
Oh, Al Gore.
Al Gore.
Al Gore.
And it was interesting to me that everybody who was laughing at him, in a way, politically speaking, he's a nice man, a serious man, intelligent man, but people kind of laughed at his political career. But he had an issue, right?
Right.
And he said that his issue was warming, global warming. And everybody supported him. I think if he was running for president, they might have voted for him.
Yeah.
And I remember my husband saying to a number of candidates, he helped Frank Church and Lord and Charles of Florida and so on, as a hobby. And he said the important thing was an issue, a real issue, not a phony issue.
Yeah.
And I thought of him because Al Gore made a lot of progress. I don't know what he's going to do with it politically, perhaps nothing.
But they used to make fun of him because he was too stiff, because we're so superficial about what's the presentation
you
like.
didn't really feel anything.
Yeah.
He seemed nice. That's all you could say.
We have so little time left, and I hate to leave the subject to the very end, but
Please.
I'm so curious about, with both Kazan and with Jerry Robbins, who had a lot of trouble during the blacklisting days because they did some pretty controversial things. But you've always been very supportive of their decisions. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, let's take Kazan.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Now, Kazan...
I mean, we could do an hour on this.
Yes, we can talk for days. But I've often said that if you live through the Depression, and at Hunter, for example, and Bella Abzug, then Bella Savitsky, was a classmate of mine in class of 42 at Hunter.
And it was all girls then, right? The proletariat Harvard.
It was all girls, 9,000 women.
Right.
Now there are 20,000, but they're not all women.
Yeah, but because
1954 they admitted men. And if you weren't a radical with depression, with poverty everywhere and so forth, I didn't think you were too bright. So everybody was a radical, but you were either this kind of a radical, let's say Stalinist, although my daughter tells me people don't remember who Stalin was, so not to say it. But I don't always listen to my daughter. And I was a Trotskyite and so forth and so on. And so we were all radical. It wasn't as if we were right-wing. I mean, that didn't seem appropriate at Hunter at the time. And Bella always stayed that way.
Bella Abzug, yes.
Yeah. And so I'm not speaking as a right-winger, which I am. I'm not.
Yeah.
I even believe in welfare and so forth. And so when Kazan joined the party, he joined it for sociological reasons and for reasons of sympathy and what the party purported to represent. And then, I don't know if we have the time, but he saw they didn't operate that way. To them, he realized it was purely propaganda from the Soviet Union.
Well, as you said, that just being anti-communist doesn't mean you were a fascist.
Exactly.
I'm not putting words in your mouth. These were your words.
No, but that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be liberal, quote, and I think of myself as a liberal, not a conservative, but but I don't identify with that group that's called liberal, who supported Stalin and the Soviet Union all through the totalitarian period. To me, it was no different. It wasn't much different than Germany. Stalin killed more people than Hitler did, as a matter of fact.
Do you feel, we have so little time left, but do you feel that one of your missions is to defend them?
Well, I feel that Kazan always told me that it isn't that it wasn't a moral issue too, and it's not enough to say that when he named the names that the government knew it from years before anyway. They knew all those other 7 people anyway. So that's not his defense. He never used that. But he said, it may have been a moral issue, but I think I did the right thing. And I think he did either. I don't think that they were dedicated. Let them say they are, if they were communists. The Communist Party was not illegal. In fact, the first people who went to jail under a kind of a political law were Trotskyites, which the communists hailed at the time.
Yeah.
Now, I was no longer a Trotskyite, but I watched it, and the communists didn't show any democratic attitude to them.
It has been such a privilege to have you here.
Thank you very much.
I hate stopping this conversation.
Well, let's continue it elsewhere.
Floria Lasky, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for joining us. On behalf of the League of Professional Theater Women, I'm Linda Weiner, and this has been Women in Theater.